they sort of said, oh my God, it's relaxers and it causes cancer. So that was the takeaway. And I think that what I really wanted to do with this conversation is to sort of bring another piece of it to it. Because again, these are, for those of us who are out here and we, see this and we deal with this on a day-to-day basis in uterine cancer. And that's been a big part of what I do, is really trying to really get the public and Black women in particular to be educated about the disparities. This episode was brought to you by Alloy Health and Rivian. Today, we're talking to Linda Villarosa, a powerful voice in health journalism. She is going to help us connect the dots between beauty and health disparities that Black women face and what is really driving them. Linda, welcome to The Second Opinion.
Thank you. So good to see you.
Now, Black women spend, anywhere from 6 to 9 times more on hair care products than any other ethnic group, despite the costs being significantly higher than hair products marketed to other groups. We're going to discuss the viral article that you wrote in the New York Times that about the link between relaxers and uterine cancer. Now, I cannot wait to have this conversation with you, Linda, because I think that I can't think of another article about hair care that has gone around the world and back again as many times as your article. But before we do that, I want our audience to hear a little bit about you. Now, you were born in Chicago and moved to Denver when you were in elementary school. So what is the hair situation in Denver?
So, the hair situation in my family was, at first, my grandmother was a beautician, and in Chicago, we lived with her. So we didn't use relaxers, but we, like you, hot combed our hair. So my grandmother, it was a big deal. She'd press our hair, all three, my sister, me, and my mom would get our hair pressed. We tried to avoid water at all costs, or else it would go back. When we moved to Denver, it was, the end of the 60s, the 70s. So we had afros. We all grew out our natural hair. We were away from grandmother, so she couldn't control us. But then when we saw her for the first time with our big, beautiful Angela Davis-esque afros, my grandmother was so upset. She would barely speak to us. She was like, "What's that mess on your head?" But as soon as we went back home to Denver, then we were good. And, I loved having that big natural.
And at that time, tell our viewers what we were really trying to get our hair to look like.
We were trying to get our hair to look, at first, as close to white as we could. So as close to straight. And straightened hair was the norm, and in many places still is the norm. And you're just trying to for me, I was trying to, at first, get my hair to look like the white girl's hair that I grew up with. Then when the 70s came around, I was trying to get my hair to just be as big as possible as a statement of pride and almost revolt. But most people, if you were and are sometimes working, you need to have straightened hair because you look, I'm using quotes, acceptable, or you look professional, especially if you're working for, say, a government job, or you're working or definitely if you're in the military. So those kinds of jobs, the more conservative jobs, and even being an anchor on television, you needed to have straight hair because that was the acceptable look. And many of that still goes. It still is current now.
Now, what amazes me is that, we have gone this far out. It's 2025, and so many of those old stigmas and standards are still there. I find that fascinating. And when I remember reading your book and you were talking about Frederick Hoffman. And, this was right after Reconstruction in terms of how we looked at the outcomes. We've always known they've been disparate, but we had different explanations for why it was so. And there was the thought that, it must be something wrong with Black people. We've never really sort of wanted to address the underlying causes of the conditions and what is it about being Black in America that causes these outcomes to be what they are. And, and I'd like to talk about that for a minute because, you're right. It has less to do with the individual and more to do with the circumstances that we tend to find ourselves in over and over again.
And I think the same way I was thinking of self-help is a way that if you just do the right thing and you're just hyper responsible about your health, you will be healthy without looking at the barriers that keep us from good health. And some of the myths from the past were ways that, sort of the reasons we had poor health outcomes where we were doing something wrong or something was wrong with us. So right. I was part of the 1619 project, and my area was looking at myths that began during enslavement and have some myths about the Black body and have somehow lasted until today. And basically 40% of medical students and residents believed at least one myth, including that Black people have higher pain tolerance than other people. So if that myth is still floating around, and that's not the only study that is looked at pain, but since that was so specific to our future medical healthcare providers, I often refer to that. So you do worry that, well, if people believe myths about us, then it's hard to be healthy. And then the second way is just the idea that we can't take care of ourselves, that we don't know what to do or choose not to do the right thing. So choose not to eat well, choose not to exercise, choose where we live. And that is false. And the segregation alone has changed the way segregation alone affects where we live and how healthful our environments are.
Right. So I think that the conversation that we really want to have is to, again, understand what are those systemic issues that really affect our health and our poor health outcomes, and sort of shift away from blaming individual behaviors for poor outcomes. And you're right. We have to realize that, I think for a lot of us in medicine, and it doesn't matter sometimes whether you are Black or white, because you can operate in a racist system that is imbued with racism, and you don't have to be racist, because we are all taught the same thing. So the misconceptions and myths that we are pulling forward really come from the, at the root of medicine, from J. Marion Sims, from Josiah's Knott. And that is a very interesting story because most of what we believe about the inferiority of Black people really comes from medicine. There was the science of it that said, oh, well, this is why Black people are uneducated. This is why, because they have smaller cranial capacity. We used science to justify poor outcomes. And unfortunately, that's still with us today. But I want to get back to your story and that is the story I think that went around the world and back again. And that is that New York Times cover piece about the link between hair straighteners, which gets us back to our hair conversation, and uterine cancer. So tell me, give me a little context. How did you get to that story, and what was the point of that story?
I think I got to the story because I saw the study from 2022, and it was a longitudinal study looking at cancer, uterine cancer, and found that those who used chemical relaxers were more likely over twice as likely to suffer from uterine cancer than those who didn't. And that kind of research is fairly new, that question is asked. So in longitudinal studies, you're studying people over a long period of time, and you're asking kind of what are the things that you do that might raise your risk of getting this kind of cancer. So that was really a surprise when that came out. At the same time, there had been lawsuits around, and they really, bulked up once the study came out around people suing that got different kinds of cancer, including uterine cancer, and who had used chemical hair relaxers. My story centered on the Black women scientists who were behind the research and whose lived experience matched. They were, as children, they began using hair relaxers and relaxed their hair for years and years. And their lived experience drove the research and often convinced the other people in the studies, the other scientists, to include questions about hair relaxers in the questionnaires.
Okay. For our listeners, I'm going to give you a little bit of context about uterine cancer, because we often will interchange the terms uterine cancer and endometrial cancer. They both are pretty much the same thing, because most of the cancers that we talk about that originate in the uterus start in the endometrium, or the lining of the uterus. And what we know, and this has been reported on again and again in the medical literature for us, is that there was the thought that Black women had a lower incidence of uterine cancer. That was the prevailing notion until about 25 years ago. And the reason why we thought they had a lower incidence of uterine cancer is because Black women had more hysterectomies. So when you go back and you correct for the fact that, they had a lower incidence of uterine cancer because they had fewer uteruses to get cancer in. So that was that. So that was the first thing that we had to sort of course correct for. But once we did that, and you look at the cases of uterine cancer in this country, you found that, we get uterine cancer at about the same rate as white women do. So you say, okay, well, that's nice to know. But what are the outcomes? And what we have found is that the outcomes, the mortality, the risk of dying from your uterine cancer is twice as high than for someone who is not Black. And that's pretty disturbing. But we've known this now for over 20 years. And I think that we have tried to come up with various explanations for why that is. And I guess the question that I want to ask you is that how is this different from just poor health outcomes?
I think of how I looked at it is this story took me longer than any other story I had done, more than writing about HIV AIDS, more than writing about maternal and infant mortality, more than writing about environmental justice, because I was trying so hard to make sure I had all my scientific ducks in a row, as well as was very cautious not to have blame people for what they do with their hair. And I think what I tried to do was have a big section about the pressure to have straight hair that is beyond beauty, but really is about survival. Certainly was about survival at the time, of my grandmother first went to beauty school. It was about if you were working, most of my great aunts worked in, they called it private family, worked for white people as the maid or the cleaner. You basically had to have straight hair, or you had to cover your hair because our hair wasn't acceptable to how white people expected it to look because it was different from theirs. So a lot of that story was about the pressure to have straightened hair. So if you have a societal pressure to have straightened hair, and the easiest way to get your hair straight on a more permanent level, so you're not having to relax it so often, or you have freak out when it rains, is to use a hair relaxer. And people were using hair relaxers, Black women and some men were using hair relaxers for years. The problem with with this part of the hair relaxer story is we were assuming that it was safe. And many of the products say safe or easy to use, gentle on the marketing, without when you look at the actual chemicals that are in the products, don't seem safe and natural. But that's not what most people do when they use this. And there's the assumption that, especially on children, that if it's safe and gentle and natural, it's fine to use on children. But I think the worry is that using these strong chemicals over time, using them in ways that cause burning or abrasions in the scalp and gives an entryway to the chemicals is unsafe. But it's unsafe without us knowing because of unfair marketing. So I think that why I was attracted to this story was because it just seems so wrong.
And let me explain what for our listeners, what the study did. It's like, okay, we're recruiting sisters of breast cancer patients, and we're going to do a big questionnaire of all of your sort of lifestyle things. But we're really looking at whether you dye your hair, whether you perm your hair or straighten it, or any combination thereof. That was sort of what the focus was. But they only asked for what you had done for the 12 months prior to entering the study. So it's just 12 months of data. And you have to self-report. You have to say, oh, I used them every month. I do it twice a week, or whatever the frequency is on how often you straighten your hair. But there's no data on how over time. Did you do this for just those 12 months? Did you do it every year? Did you do it 6 years in a row? Because it seems to be that if that were the question you were trying to ask, it wouldn't be just how often you had done it in the past 12 months, but how often you've done it over your lifetime, or even in the future going forward. So that was a little problematic for me in terms of being able to make any conclusions about what was driving that.
Well, I can only speak for my own reporting. So I didn't jump on this. It came out in 2022. I didn't even start this story until later because I was afraid of overhyping it and making and scaring people and blaming them.
Right.
So I was very cautious around that. I also took me a long time because I started not with that study, but started way back, much, much earlier with sort of an incremental building of research that has pointed to not the relaxing itself, but the chemicals in the relaxing. So that is looking at chemicals. And I mean, it's interesting to hear from your physician perspective compared to my journalistic perspective. Because I thought, oh, this study is going to give me the opportunity, because I have a news hook, and it's something that, I was like the 77th person to report on this study, but I just did it much bigger. But this is going to give me the opportunity to talk about some of the things I want to talk about, which is health disparities, which is the lack of Black women investigators in research, which is the lack of Black women subjects in these long-term studies, which is a chance to talk about the Black Women's Health Study, which also replicated some of these findings. And also the chance to talk about the pressure, this long-term societal pressure that means that many Black women have straightened their hair, and why mothers would straighten their children's hair. So that's what I tried to do. And I think I used more caution than most people would do, most journalists would do in reporting this, to say, I really am trying hard not to blame individual people, but this is an opportunity also to talk about the lax way that the products are marketed and the lax way they're regulated.
I totally understand that. And I guess what I want you to understand from my perspective is that, yes, uterine cancer is a problem. Disparate outcomes are a problem. But when you are looking at the real risk factors for uterine cancer, and it helps to kind of know what is going on trend-wise. And I think for the past 20 years, what we have seen in the incidence of uterine cancer in the United States, it's gone up for everyone, not just Black women, for Black women, for Hispanic women, for Asian women, consistently. And there's a recurring theme whenever you look at race, when you look at Black women in that particular cohort, it always comes earlier, faster, more severely. So, yes, it's going up for everybody, but we feel it the most. And I think understanding that and to look at it in the context, okay, well, 20 years has been going up for everyone. Uterine cancer is one of the few cancers where not only is it going up, but the outcomes are worse. Usually, even when, you've got cancer, our treatments get better. Well, not so much for uterine cancer. It's sort of Not only is the incidence going up, but more people are dying from uterine cancer than ever before, which is problematic across the board. But I think that what I really want to get to the root of is, okay, well, then what are those other things? How can straightening your hair be correlated with other things? Because what do women who straighten their hair do? I want to tell a bigger story, so such that we know what to do and, how not to sort of absolve ourselves of responsibility for the things that we can do, not to absolve the medical community of the things that we need to do, because there's a lot that needs to be done there, in the hopes that we will get better health outcomes.
I'm not a scientist. I'm a journalist, but I understand the difference between proving something is, and what the difference between an association and definitely a causation. And I think I tried to be careful around that language about causation. And also, I think the reason I was interested in this story is because it was an environmental justice story for me, and for others, because it's about the kind of toxic buildup that we have as Black people, especially Black women, in this country. And hair relaxers isn't causing uterine cancer, but if we have a toxic buildup, including toxic stress, and including the communities where we live in being more polluted and more environmental access to toxins, then it becomes this sort of buildup on our bodies. And I think this was one way for me to keep talking about this topic that I've written about, like in every single way possible for about 30 years. And this became an opening for me. But I hope that it didn't seem like I thought, you're straightening your hair, it's your fault, and you're giving yourself cancer. Because that is not my goal.
Now, I want to talk about a really important topic, hope for the future. My favorite saying is, there are no accidents in the universe. Previously, I was in a time of my life when I was wondering if and how I should pivot in my career. I decided a positive mindset with support from my friends and family was going to get me through writing my first women's health book. What happened after that, no one could have predicted. It became a New York Times bestselling book, and being out in the menopause world opened a whole new world for me. I'm learning that change isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one filled with possibility. On the topic of hope, I want to highlight Rivian's work in designing vehicles that actively shape the world we live in. Rivian's fully electric, full-size SUVs and pickups made with the future in mind. Step into a Rivian and you'll feel it. Beautifully designed interiors that blend luxury with durability. Whether you're heading into the wild or just across town, it's comfort that's built to roam. From rock crawling to road tripping, Rivian vehicles are engineered for all terrains with the muscle and intelligence to take you further. Rivian's thoughtful design includes tons of storage, from gear tunnels to front trunks, so you never have to leave your favorite toys or trail gear behind. With over 30 sensors on board, Rivian is always helping watch out, not just for you, but for your passengers, the road, and everything around you. Rivian's easy fast charger system means less time plugged in, more time off-grid. Power up quickly and hit the road or the trail without delay. Whether you're driving through mountain passes or navigating city streets, Rivian keeps you safe, connected, and confident. Rivian is on a mission to help create a sustainable world that is rich in wonder and adventure that provides hope for future generations. Thanks again to our friends at Rivian. Learn more at Rivian.com. At Alloy, we firmly believe that given good information, women are more than capable of making good decisions for themselves. If you've had thoughts around menopausal hormone therapy, but have not gotten a recommendation from your primary physician, connect with one of the menopause-trained doctors at Alloy. Here's how it works. Sign up and personalize your treatment. Fill out a quick intake to share your symptoms and goals. Match with a menopause doctor. Connect with a board-certified doctor in just hours. Easily manage your plan. Receive a treatment plan tailored to your body, your symptoms, and your life. Care delivered to your door. get your prescription sent right to your doorstep. I am proud that Alloy is the only company that connects women with doctors in all 50 states and DC. And you have the ability to ask questions to that doctor for the entire time your prescription is active. No extra charges. And guess what? It's available to you online. No endless waits for a doctor's visit or in pharmacy lines. Just relief and results delivered right to you. Join the 95% of women who tried Alloy and saw relief in the first 2 weeks. Head to myalloy.com and tell them all about your symptoms, and you'll get a fully customized treatment plan. And you'll get $25 off your first order today when you use code TSO25. Head to myalloy.com and enter code TSO25 to get $25 off your first order. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Rivian and their all-electric, full-size SUVs and trucks made for all of life's adventures. Rivian just announced their all-new Rivian Quad, their fastest, most capable vehicle yet. Powered by 4 motors, 1 for each wheel, it gives you unmatched traction, control, and performance anywhere you are. On winding roads or off-road trails, the Quad is engineered for precision driving and maximum adventure. With a native NACS port, the Quad is compatible with 50,000 DC fast chargers, so getting back on the road is hassle-free. With beautifully designed interiors, tons of storage, and incredible capability inside and out, the Quad is made for everyday comfort and rugged utility. Plus, you'll love the tech. The Rivian experience gets better over time with software updates. The premium audio experience sounds as good as the ride feels. Premium audio is part of the Sound Plus Vision package in Quad and Tri vehicles and can be a paid upgrade in dual models. And the Rivian Autonomy Platform Plus, a paid subscription product, offers a full suite of advanced safety and driver assistance features. There is adaptive cruise control, active lane keeping, blind spot monitoring, and forward collision warning with automatic emergency braking. Check out the all-new, all-electric quad truck or SUV and the full lineup of vehicles now at Rivian.com. One of my favorite memories was a double mother-daughter trip to Paris in the springtime. It was my daughter's first trip to Paris, and I went with a close friend and her daughter. Instead of getting hotel rooms, we decided to book a cozy home on Airbnb. We were centrally located, could easily sightsee, get fresh groceries, and some good wine, of course. It was our home away from home and one of my favorite trips I've taken with my daughter. As I look around at my family, I feel so grateful for the opportunity to make new memories. I often think, while we're away making these memories, someone else could be creating their own special family traditions in my home. That's what I love about hosting on Airbnb. Your home doesn't have to sit empty. It becomes a place for another family to gather, cook, and make memories of their own. By opening up your extra space, you could turn it into a welcoming retreat for travelers from around the world. And the added income? It could help fund future adventures, thoughtful gifts, or whatever else matters most to you. Wouldn't it feel good to know your home has its own holiday story to tell? Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host. Well, you and I both know that in today's sort of TikTok world where everybody's getting their information from, a 60-second, sort of little story or vignette, or they're scrolling through their phones, a lot of times they never read the story. So what we all have to be sort of, cognizant of, this is the world that we live in. Nobody wants to read, you get past paragraph 2 and you've probably lost 90% of the people that have, that even clicked on the story to begin with. And that is the problem, I think, sometimes is that we lose a little the nuance of the story. And what is the real takeaway, because we never get to the end of it. And then we've already jumped ahead to the conclusion, because I can tell you that, at least from talking to people that I know who sort of saw that, they didn't get to the end of the story, and they just sort of said, yeah, it's a balanced story. They sort of said, oh my God, it's relaxers and it causes cancer. So that was the takeaway. And I think that what I really wanted to do with this conversation is to sort of bring another piece of it to it. Because again, these are, for those of us who are out here and we, see this and we deal with this on a day-to-day basis in uterine cancer. And that's been a big part of what I do, is really trying to really get the public and Black women in particular to be educated about the disparities as they exist. And we've got a lot of societal things to do. But in the meantime, while we're trying to rework medicine, I want them to know what the risk factors are.
I think one way that I understood it from the scientists that I interviewed was, the vast majority of Black women have used a relaxer sometime in their life. The vast majority of Black women used a relaxer during childhood. So I think the worry isn't the people who have stopped using them more recently, but the people who use them in the past. Maybe they're still using them now. And certainly I thought twice about even doing this story. And the editor of this was, one of the two were Black women. And she pointed out, are you sure we should do this? Relaxer use is down. So then I looked and I said, well, yes, relaxer use is way down. But some of this work was about who used them at childhood. And so I started thinking, it's like, I think there is still a need for this kind of information. And I just tried to do it as carefully as I could, as thoughtfully. And I also, I think it's interesting that I was really excited by that cover. Because some of the stories I do, people are so surprised that the New York Times Magazine is doing a story on Black women and hair relaxer. People are so surprised that there's a Black pregnant woman on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. People are so surprised, that there's two sisters who were sterilized against their will and without their consent from the 70s that are on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. So what I try to do is just get as much of this information as wide of an audience as I can.
All right. So since this heightened awareness, I think from your article, I think even fewer people are relaxing their hair, and I certainly, even in my friend group, I don't know many people who are still relaxed. Even people who wear their hair straight, they're not relaxing it. They're doing silk. You got all kinds of new technology and silk presses and stuff like that they do.
I think the worry for me about hair relaxers was that, like every single person that I asked, and, after you do this for a year, I interviewed a lot of people, and I would always ask about their personal experience. 100% said, remembered it being burning. And that was having, scars or, it going wrong at one point. And so the worry for me wasn't the amount of products we put on our hair as much as the relaxer allowing a convenient entryway for the chemicals that are not very well regulated. So that was the worry. That's why it was a little bit more interesting than just for me doing a blanket article about products we put on our hair. This thing has this entryway using burning. If you saw the movie Good Hair, it was, I think it was Reverend Al Sharpton and Ice-T talking about, oh my God, I remember the burning. And so I found that fascinating. But I agree with you that we do use a lot of products on our hair because we're just trying to get it to look how we want it to look in its natural state.
Right. So, I think that there are a lot of things that we're gonna agree on, Linda. And, as I said, I don't think that there is I really don't think that again, perming your hair is a good thing. And there are just so many other societal things about it, regardless of whether or not it's a health hazard or not. It just is a lot of baggage that goes along with it. But I think that when we think about hair and what we do to hair and how our hair is policed, in the workplace, in society. We've got to come up with something that I think sort of relieves a little bit of the stress on us for doing that. I don't know how we're ever going to get there, but we're better now than we were.
Certainly.
Wouldn't you agree? 20 years ago,
Definitely.
50 years ago.
My grandmother is, bless her soul, isn't around to yell at us about how my sister wears a big natural. My daughter's hair is really big and curly. My other kid's hair is really big and curly and messy. But I do think there is a growing movement around what's called beauty justice and looking at the products and that are so ill-regulated in this country. There's a group called the Environmental Working Group, which looks at beauty products and looks at the amount of chemicals in them and did some of this research around the ingredients. I think it's really hard right now as we see the gutting of of some of the agencies that would be looking at this. And the FDA wasn't amazing before, so now it's even harder. I think that there are people who are thinking about this, who are advocating, who are trying to make a difference around the structural issues and not just telling people don't relax your hair, but to say, why are our products like this?
What do you feel that after having done this, your article, what do you feel that the message that you wanted to get out there was the one that was received? And what do you feel optimistic about? Do you think that you've moved the dial on as a result of your article?
I think that in anything I do, the message is around structural issues. So that's why I wasn't one of the 77 other people who wrote about the 2022 study around uterine cancer and the ingredients in chemical hair relaxers that stopped there. So I tried to say these are the bigger societal issues that go along with all health disparities. And this is just another chemical burden or toxic burden on our bodies. So I think I achieved that and got to talk about the things I really care about through the lens of something that I'm a journalist. I got to do something that's new. And this was what was new. I think that the most positive thing that is happening is really a reimagining of medical education, whether it's in medical students, nursing students, midwifery students, people studying public health, where it's coming from, if you will, the ground up. So it's students themselves who are pushing to be a different kind of healthcare provider. And I got a little bit down in the last 6 months around what's happening in medical schools and the end of so-called DEI and all this stuff. And then I've still visited a lot of medical schools in the last few months, and I still see this really enthusiastic, hungry group of sometimes younger people, mostly younger people, but not always, people who are studying medicine of some sort or public health, who are super enthusiastic to change the way we're doing things, to look at structural issues, to not blame people for their own health problems, to be kind to them within the context of the healthcare system. And I think that is, of all the problems, of all the reasons for poor health outcomes around Black people and other marginalized people, that is both the worst thing, that in the healthcare system itself, you can be harmed, but it's also the easiest one to solve. It's easier than, say, weathering, which is kind of hard. It's easier than changing all of our environments, the environments that we live in, that we grew up in, we've gone back generations to places that have been harmed by segregation. This is the one we can actually solve easier, is to say we want a different kind of healthcare system that puts kind of the care back in healthcare.
Outstanding. Linda, thank you so much for your work and for being on the show. And I hope that you and I will have many more conversations along the way because, it's important. And I think that people need to hear it, and they need to hear, not just what you read, but to actually go a little bit beyond the headline. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do. And thank you for your show.
Before we close out, it's time for the last part of the show where I give my doctor's orders and leave our audience with takeaways from today's conversations. Number 1, don't believe everything you see on every headline or on social media. Ask yourself, does this person really have the credentials to speak on health topics, or are they only looking for engagements and clicks? Number 2, advocate for better consumer and health research and educate yourself on healthcare disparities. Number 3, and most importantly, know the signs and symptoms of uterine cancer. Always investigate irregular or heavy bleeding prior to menopause and any postmenopausal bleeding. Sonograms are not as reliable for ruling out uterine cancer in Black women because of fibroids. Most importantly, if you want to know what's the number one risk factor for uterine cancer, it's obesity. It is the driver for the increased risk in uterine cancer, breast cancer, and all other chronic diseases. For more details and links, be sure to check out our show notes for the episode. Keep joining each week on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts as I break down complex medical issues and give you actionable advice on how to secure that second opinion. If you enjoyed the show, follow us so you never miss an episode. And if you like what you hear, leave a review. Until next time, take care.